panels from Cuna that will participate in the ILCLA conference. And I think we came up with something really creative that not only showcases the collaborations that Cuna has with different artists, but actually brings those artists into collaboration with each other. So I loved how that wasn't our idea going into the planning meeting, but it was great to see what came out of it. So yeah, so it looks like everyone is here. Mika, hola Mika, Eric, I see you're on, and Richard, we're glad you're here. And I was just sort of setting things up, just saying that we'll reflect a little bit on the very powerful workshop that we had last Friday, and then also possibly make a space for Tamara to kind of tell us what she's doing in the Hopkins Gallery space. So I'll turn it over to you, Richard.
I always like how you do that, Michelle, as if I have something that I'm going.
Well, they're kind of unstructured, but I feel like this is, you're the framing guy. So if you have something great, if not, then we'll just kind of open it up.
No, it's okay. It's cool. No, I'm just thinking. So again, the excitement of these weekly sessions, because they're either split between the Pachysana workshops, or the reflection sessions, or our distance unlearning hour. And there are people that attend who were not there the week before. There are people that attend who've come back from a period of time away. And so I think it's always good to kind of just take stock of that and that kind of shifting attendance. And one way to do that might be just to acknowledge that some of us were there last week for the workshop. And so I think if one of us or a few of us could kind of share with those of us here who were not there, kind of what kind of went down in the workshop, so that we can kind of start that conversation. And then those of you that are attending for the first time in a while or for the first time, you could introduce yourselves and just say hi to the group. Actually, maybe all of us, if we introduce ourselves as we make comments as well. So I'm Richard Fletcher, Arts Administration, Education and Policy, and one of the co-organizers of this group. And yeah, so let's and also I should acknowledge that Daniel Bryan's here, who is one of the organizers at Pachysana Institute, and he kind of set up the group. And maybe it's unfair to start with you, Daniel, given that you are the kind of coordinator of that group. So let's start with someone else who went through the experience. Mika, actually, you're on my screen. Let's go for it.
Yeah, definitely. It was experimental, to say the least. Daniel and Shell, I believe, started off by asking us to kind of take control of their bodies. And we kind of directed them throughout their rooms, their own spaces. We gave them commands or stimulus kind of, and they completed actions according to what we asked them to do. Sometimes they interacted with each other. Other times they left the camera, they got quiet. I really liked when they spoke with their hands and everything like that. But then we experimented. Instead of asking them to perform with their bodies, we took the opportunity to perform with our own bodies. And we kind of cycled through a few phrases, a few words like monoculture, garden, bridge. And we kind of acted out these words and asked ourselves, how do these make us feel? What do we do with our bodies when we think about these? And in conclusion, we kind of ended on the point where the body is a source of knowledge. It is a source of resistance, and we gain information from it. We gain how we feel about these subjects, how our body reacts to the word hurt, to pain, to scar. What we do, we crunch up. Or if we hear something like flower or growth or life, what we do. And it was just an experimental process of not only learning what these definitions mean to us, but how we interact with them. And for those of you who don't know me, I'll introduce myself while I'm speaking. I'm Mika. I'm an undergraduate here at OSU. I'm in my third year in the Spanish and Portuguese department. Specifically, I'm interested in Andean and Amazonian and indigenous cultures. I'm working on languages, in particular Spanish, I'm in a class with Isis taking Portuguese, and we just had a wonderful presentation on art activism. And I wrote under my reflection about using the body as a source of knowledge, who had this artist using their hands and kind of taking up, occupying white spaces. And I think it's a really interesting connection, but I'm also studying Quechua too. And I'm hopeful that I get a chance to go abroad soon.
So I'm thinking maybe, Kurt, I wonder if you feel comfortable sort of sharing your experience with the workshop because you had some really powerful reactions, I think.
Hi, um, I'm Kurt, and for those who don't know me, I live in West Virginia, and I'm really happy to be here. And I guess that's all for today. I really appreciated the movement because I don't know, I can be kind of a big lug, and I spent a lot of years not really moving around too much. And even though I'm a musician, I picked a very stationary instrument, and but something about last week made me, I was like, well, I don't care if we're on video and whatever. I was just like, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And it was really great. So I really appreciate that. But I mean, I was really interested too in how some of the words that were chosen for us to sort of illustrate for ourselves and others really the interaction between what you kind of had your body do, but then what your body told you as you were doing it. So for example, one word that really stood out to me was wound, and that actually ended up making myself feel like I was actually wounded somehow. And, but that could be applied to any of the words, even some of the more joyous ones in the rain. Like, I don't know, maybe it's the time of life I'm in or what I've been doing, but everything seemed a lot more real. Whereas maybe even a year ago, I would have been like, whatever. This is kind of dumb, but it's not. So I really appreciated it. And thank you, Daniel.
Tamron, were you there last week? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you all hear me okay? I'm in a gallery. Okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed the collaborative part. I have actually 3 ongoing collaborations right now with people of a wide range of disciplines, and it was so they're ongoing, but this was like a quick, like I don't know, we had 15 minutes to collaborate, 4 of us, to pull our movements together and to create something together. And I really appreciated that kind of space, like a way to connect with people, to make something together in such like a short, quick, just like, don't think, just do it, I felt like the way that it came together for us too was very fluid. I mean, we worked really well together, and I really appreciated that experience. That was the part that really, something that stayed with me.
I don't know, maybe I'll share a little bit of my experience. So it was the range of emotions, and thoughts that this exercise provoked that was impressive, So just thinking about like the freedom of the ludic aspect of what Kurt was saying, like feeling our bodies and just feeling our toes and, walking in different ways that we wouldn't normally walk, It was so light and healing, like to actually to feel our bodies in that way, like in a meditative sort of space, right? I love the collaborations also, and I had kind of an unexpected reaction, to the exercise about the words. So one of the reflections that I have is that the words that were productive in my mind and growth oriented generated a lot of movement. And there were a couple of words that completely stumped me. One of them was monoculture, and the other one was survival. And I didn't know what to do, and I just stayed very still. But it also brought me back to thinking about the broader theme that we originally came under, which was migration, mobility, and immobility, right? And as I kind of froze on those words, it took me back to an experience. And again, the space of the workshop was vulnerable, and this space is kind of vulnerable, so I'll share this. But I had a very powerful experience with discrimination, or I don't even know what to call it. And it was a situation where my son had been invited to a birthday party at one of these Bexley mansions. They had like the 18-wheeler video game trucks parked out front, all these facilitators with all these remote controlled cars and, all this for the kids. But my son was pretty little and he wasn't comfortable staying by himself, so he asked me to stay. And I asked the host, was it okay for me to hang out, because he's kind of a little bit shy right now. And they said yes, I could hang out, but it was drizzling. It was starting to rain. It was drizzling. The kids were in the video truck, and the hosts were going in the house and parading in and out of the house with glasses of wine, going to the video truck, and didn't invite me in. And they left me standing in the rain. And I told my son, I said, I feel humiliated, and he was little, but I told him this, I said, I feel really uncomfortable here, and I think I should leave. And he said, no, Mom, don't leave, you're going to mess up my party. So I looked him in the eye and I said, Kai, this is the type of things that parents do for their kids, as like a sacrifice. And I stood there in the rain, and I felt that feeling when I heard the words monoculture and survival, where I didn't know what to do. I was confused, and the confusion just sent me into this sort of paralysis. But that lesson served me so well because in that moment and afterwards, I've reflected on it many times, where I understood something about racism and discrimination that I had not understood before. And I felt it as a very embodied sort of thing, right? So I just wanted to throw that out there because it was something that came out of the workshop for me, and something deeply connected to this idea of mobility and mobility embodied sort of reactions.
Michelle, thank you for sharing that. And also something that, so the Pachasana workshop has been focused on storytelling. And this was the session on the body as part of storytelling, or storytelling with and through the body. And I think, Michelle, what you're just describing is the way, trauma locates itself in bodily processes and memory and these kinds of things. So, there may have been even something about standing and standing inside outside that came from those words as well, and actions. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that stories can come up from somewhere, right, and come up through us in ways which we're kind of confronted by them in ways. And I was wondering whether to open it out just a little bit to folks who were not part of the workshop, but just to kind of, with a kind of question that comes through here, which is maybe in the work you're doing in a class you're teaching or a part of, or a workshop or a talk you've been part of, have there been elements in which we're all sitting here in these little boxes, these bodies around that kind of, where the question of the body or the self-awareness of your own body has become kind of has turned up in the conversation or turned up in your own thinking about that. I'm just wondering if just to kind of open it out to just think about that. And the other issue is also the question of translation as well. In the workshop, there was a moment of where there was when Chell and Daniel were being ordered to move in certain ways or invited to move in certain ways. One of the questions was, pretend you don't know English for the next 4 commands. And I was just thinking that that could be another space for us to talk a little bit about, is elements of translation, even non-verbal translation as it comes to the body. So yeah, anything, maybe if someone's willing to jump into this space who wasn't there last week, who is willing to add their voice. That's fun.
I think perhaps I should start with the lack of voice. Like before coming to the US for my graduate studies, I suffered from aphasia. So what happened with me made me lose my capacity to communicate with others. And this was temporary, it was a trauma, no? And the interesting solution found by my mother was to send me to the US. Now I am in Brazil. And I went to spend a month in the US as a foreigner. I ended up researching there, finding a grant. Eventually I went back to the US. But from aphasia to being a foreigner, and yeah, like this is such a huge topic that it's hard to even find an entry into this. Like one of the first aspects that affected my body directly from the moment I entered the US, and I wasn't see, like it goes into aphasia. Like I cease to exist, or I cease to exist as I know myself, no? And I lost all the references. So part of me, like one of my reactions was to start from ground zero. And that prompted me, I used to have very long hair, to cut my own hair. Never again, I let my hair grow. I think there was an Athena's or something, from now on, I'm my own warrior, no? And this is informed by my growing up in Brazil in a German school. No, I was the 0.1% of the non-Germans, no? And eventually my work with Afro-Brazilian art and activism. And this is one of the reasons that I'm almost never here. We are almost at the same time. So often like we end and I have to continue talking to the guest and I cannot enter this lecture. No. And the contemporary Afro-Brazilian art is like, this is one of the, well, this is something all over the world, no, but how they are using their bodies. And one thing is before the pandemia, no, and what it is now with the pandemia, but the right to circulate in not only racist territory, but profoundly violent territory. And it was only once, I remember, in Brooklyn, because I went to study, I got a grant at NYU, that's how I moved to the US. I was walking in a mall in Brooklyn, and they had like those mirrors, sort of like pillars with mirrors, and I looked at it, and I was the only non-Black person in that space, you know. I had never experienced something like this before. Actually, the only other time that I experienced something similar was in Peru, of all places, because all the references there for me were so foreign that I didn't I didn't see myself as a belonging part in the group, no. And the artist that Mika was talking about earlier on, he's a Black artist in São Paulo, and São Paulo, differently from Rio de Janeiro or Bahia, is a predominantly white space. You know? There wasn't like we still do not have a Black middle class here. So his work is as simple as the bringing the body. So the presença negra, the Black presence that he was talking about, they are in what they call the noble areas of São Paulo, bairros nobres, that's how they refer to. So the area where the galleries are and so on and so forth. Often they are going to have exhibits on indigenous art or Afro-Brazilian art, but in these exhibits, you are not going to find one indigenous person, one Black person. It's just going to be the topic. So what Moisés Patricio started doing through Facebook, and WhatsApp, like things like this, said, hey, there is going to be the opening of this exhibit in place X, let's go, So suddenly, like in a small white gallery, there would be 40 Black bodies. And the first reaction was to go to them and talk to them in English. It would be okay for a gringo Black person to be here. Other than that, we are probably going to be executed. That's the end. There is no reason for all these Black people to be here. So and he conducted this experiment for 1 year. And the reactions from the mainstream media, even when they were sort of applauding the experiment, was very contradictory.
So thank you, Isis. I wonder, I mean, this connects in very powerful ways to something that we explored and Mika mentioned, but maybe we can invite Daniel to jump in with the notion that the body is the first territory, right? So that connection between like the land acknowledgement and the body, was pretty revealing, I think, to many of us, So I don't know, Daniel, if this sparks any thoughts for you.
Absolutely, and I thank you everyone for sharing and for welcoming me again to this space. This, sometimes I feel it's a shame that, like with Mika's comment, that this had to be an experiment, that these are such big experiments to explore with our body. And with this idea of it's aphasia. I didn't even know the word before. So, but this idea of separation and how Isis talked about kind of just losing all reference to, and it seems to be, there seems to be a strong notion of disconnect to our body just as much as a disconnect to a space and place, or disconnect to concepts of home, or feelings, I should say, more than concepts of home. How we feel at home in our body, just how we feel at home in our space. And something came out in a class the other day in which we actually used some of the same activities we did last Friday, but in a class that we're doing on theater for social change with some international students and community counterparts from different communities in Ecuador online. And the disconnect also turned to our disconnection from celebration. The idea that how do we reconnect to the importance of celebrating with our whole body, and the idea of also pounding that body into place, pounding that body into the earth or our territory. And so in Ecuador and in other places, surely around the world, but and also especially in the Andean region, we have the way of dancing that we call zapatear, because it's that idea, of course, of stomping the land and feeling that rhythm, but feeling the rhythm of the land and the rhythm of your bodies, and how the search for that shared music between the two is the celebration. And luckily we're gonna work a little on that this next week when we go into music, but this idea of trying to reconnect the body to music and not just this auditory exploration of music. So I was really moved by how everybody engaged the space on last Friday, and also thinking of Michelle's comment, this idea of how I don't know how to react to these words. And it reminds me of an activity. It must be one of our semesters where we had international students and locals in the community of Pintag, just outside of Quito. And we were doing these exercises where they had to embody words, but they had to do them in their own group. And there was such a struggle because it was in our first week. So there was a struggle with a lot of the international students trying to embody some of these deep conceptual words. And you can't do that. You can't put that in the body. And I overheard, just as, kind of as facilitators, you're going from group to group. And I overheard one, well, if you can't put it in the body, we're not going to let you talk about it either. And, we weren't involved in the group, but just that, I mean, and they were being playful with it. And it wasn't, I maybe said it a little more confrontational, but it was more playful. But it was so meaningful to me just to hear that, because I'm guilty of the same thing. Oh, I can't do that in my body, but I can talk about it. So I'm just going to talk about it. So I'll leave you with that for right now.
Maybe that sort of goes to the issues of translation, right? That Richard had brought up before. I don't know. And we've brought that up in the past as well.
Well, actually, and I did want to say something about that comment, which is coming out in the same online class just the other day, was the difficulty of translation. And one of our participants being from his first language being Aingai, which is a language of the A'i-Kofan people of the Ecuadorian Amazon, and the difficulty of speaking basically subject, verb, object, and how that led to a conversation of how it's so centered in us instead of centered in territory, and what we do to maybe territory, what we do as opposed to that, starting with the movement, starting with the action that locates us in place. So that also came out, and I thought it related to Richard's comment.
I was just reminded of and I wouldn't be able to find the source for this. I think it was just a post on Instagram, and it was an Afro-Indigenous person in the US. I'm not sure. Oh no, sorry, they're in Canada somewhere, who was talking about the project of using Indigenous languages to describe Black Lives Matter. And even having like a cap that says something like Black Lives Matter in their Indigenous language. And this person was saying, don't do that, because you want it to be accessible to everybody. You need to kind of not have that language, meaning it's not accessible to anyone. And I felt kind of conflicted about, I mean, this was a person that was, Afro-Indigenous. So they had a very distinctive stake in this, that this question of, communication when it matters, and yeah, anyway, I'll leave that there in the ether. I don't know, just that problem of accessibility, because I often think about imperial language as being, needing to be named as imperial language, at the same time as how do we know when, smoothness of communication, urgency of communication needs to be privileged over contaminated languages or the imperial languages.
Yeah, related to this comment, Richard, like they translated over here in Brazil, vidas negras importam, which from the beginning, like it doesn't even sound right. Like it's a direct Google translation, no? And there were many other hashtags and calls that were pertinent to the Brazilian reality. Marielle Presente, Libertem Rafael Braga, like from the MNU the Black National Movement of the 70s to the present. But more and more, this translation of Black Lives Matter gained traction, and despite my elucubrations on the subject, like there is, of course, the sort of the lingua francas of the Americas, and how this, for instance, like Brazil, the fact that Brazil is already isolated in Latin America due to its linguistic nature, but how it amplifies the diaspora, how it creates a space for Brazil. But I wish that there was another way of framing this.
Well, maybe we could take the conversation, and the conversation we can come back to these topics, but to Tamrin, and so Tamrin will be able to introduce it better than I can, but just to give a little overview, Tamrin has been participating in a embodied exhibition that's been the last 4 days at our Hopkins Hall Gallery. And Tamrin is a regular contributor to these discussions. And when Michelle and I found out that she was going to be on site in the space, which I've only seen through videos and photos on Instagram, and actually that we get to, I don't know if Tamrin is able to move around the space or anything like that, but we actually get a little bit of action in our session today. And so while not only I think that we want to hear about this project, Tamrin, but also, how can this conversation that we've been having join you in that space? I think that that's something. So not putting it all on you, but thinking about our continuing discussion of the body, and discussion of these translation questions, and also questions of region and indigenous knowledges. If we can move them into your space, that would be wonderful. But yeah, so let's go live to Tamrin in Hopkins Hall Gallery.
Sure. I'm going to do my best. So I'm working on this project with 3 other PhD students. And what we're doing is we spent 4 days this week in Hopkins Hall Gallery. And I'll see, which is typically a space that shows artwork. And what we've been each doing is mapping our, it's called trace layer play. So we've been kind of tracing our history of knowledge and understanding, layering onto that, and then really playing. And I've been intuitively moving things around in my space, in the gallery, playing. Everything has been changing on a sometimes hourly basis. And what I'm attempting to do is understand my own art education in an MFA program, and kind of be very vulnerable in that I'm used to displaying my artwork in gallery spaces, but I'm not used to putting my ideas on display in such a way in that I've extracted text and ideas from my own sketchbooks that are typically private. And it's part of the process of, you all going to an art gallery will see the finished art product on display, but you don't often get to see how those ideas come to be. And so I've physically been taking my ideas out of a book that never gets shared, and then essentially moving around, drawing physical lines to connect the ideas, understanding how texts that I'm reading relate to visual elements, asking myself questions, layering some moving images and experimental videos that I've been doing. This is a weaving out of silk that was made from scraps from the making of a project. So really taking objects, ideas, and texts and putting them into a space together so that I can essentially simultaneously and that I can visually see what's what's going on in here. And another really interesting part of this project has been seeing how other other students in my program conceptualize their ideas. And here, Robin has a project that actually you have to walk on a trail and physically move and ask yourself questions and respond. And she's working with the body and ideas of belonging as well. And so people who have visited the space have been leaving Post-it notes and commenting. And then we have a designer who thinks in a very different way. And the designer, Noor Murtaza, is layering analog Post-its with digital Post-its and ideas, and exploring ideas of design education and pedagogy. She also just recently posted criticisms on her wall, which is pretty amazing. And then finally, another art educator, this is Aileen Kim's work, and she created word clouds. I don't know if you can see that, from books and all the readings that she's been doing. And then she's allowed visitors to map and make connections with dry erase markers. And she used these word clouds on the floor and really wanted to be physically inside of, in the middle of these texts as a way of processing and making connections. And then we have, lastly, a collaborative Miro board that we've invited visitors to also layer both analog and digital Post-it notes and ideas in order to make connections to what we're doing. So that was a little gallery tour. I hope it didn't take too long.
I mean, is your Cassandra Press reader still there? Can we have a
yeah,
little,
of course.
little post up?
Sure. And actually this is, there's only a couple recent projects, one of which is this Cassandra Press reader that has 5 readings, some Deleuze and Guattari, some Rosi Braidotti, which was a text that I I read 4 times. And in order to make connections, I actually deconstructed and sewed the text together, layering connections throughout. So now it kind of exists as a text that like drapes onto the floor and becomes this physical representation of the ideas in the work. Yeah, I'm still processing what this all means and what it means for me going forward as a researcher, but it's talking about embodiment and like really feeling things. When I started to come to the gallery on Tuesday morning, I actually felt the most relaxed and calm that I've probably felt since I started in this PhD program, because I knew I was coming into a space that was like public and that I would be engaging with people, and that I created this space for myself to really only focus on this one thing for 4 days. Like I haven't been reading like I usually am. I've just been like playing with my ideas, like physically on this wall. And that's just been, and also talking, like engaging in conversation about the work. So having this exchange with other people in the space and being physically present has just been like, just insane at this time, yeah.
I think that your work with the Cassandra Press reader, where last semester we saw it get deconstructed, reconstructed, repieced, sewn together. I mean, it adds a whole other meaning to deep reading, right? Like to a really profound deep reading and the connections, the reconstruction of the text in many, many different ways and interpretations. But I have a question for you, which is I love how you've put like objects and texts and ideas out there. It really resonates with indigenous sort of approaches to like intertextual type of representations, right? And our insistence in our small collection, you know, to always present objects as documents, right, alongside books. But the question is, um, thinking about like how different the process is of engaging with others by way of your process, like basically out on the wall, like you say, the things that we often don't see in terms of how a thing is constructed, right? So the actual process of thinking versus a final product. Like, how does that change the dynamic of interaction and interconnection?
It's interesting because typically when I'm in a space with a finished artwork that I'm showing and I'm engaging in conversation with people, I mean, for whatever reason, I unpack it in this same way. Like I actually find myself speaking too much to explain it. I want them to know the process. I want them to know everything. And I have actually found, and that's something I really recognized during this exploration, is that I did the same thing with this, like I think people can look at it and see it and really, they can see the connections, but I still felt the need to explain and talk. I talked too much and I kept saying like, oh, let me just let you look. And if you have questions, like ask me and I can talk about it. But I kept having to stop myself from talking too much. So it's like I recognize that when I saw this and had to explain it like another layer, and I don't want to have to do that. I want the work to speak for itself, and like putting a material next to the idea of that relates to that material, making those kind of connections where it's like the material can represent and stand in for the idea. And this unrealized artwork, in a ball of yarn or something. So. Yeah, Daniel, the interaction with the viewers too, I think it was really important for us to, especially with COVID, we want feedback and we want to have conversations, and that's been really challenging. And so this has allowed us to, one, have conversations with one another, but also to get people to move through the space and like give us ideas, ask us questions, put Post-its physically on the wall to leave their own, like to embed themselves in our own inquiry, to involve other people in it. And it's been really fun to watch people engage with it.
I love they looked like strings or I put chords. Is that what you had in yours, the strings?
Yeah, it's wax linen.
Wax linen?
It's used for basketry and bookbinding.
Okay, well, quite lovely, yeah. And it's my theater training or my theater self, or just how I do my life or how I do me was appreciating the 3D nature of that as opposed to drawing on the wall. And being able to think of kind of a tightrope walk at sometimes, or like scaling down it almost like a zip line. And I was thinking about it kind of in terms of our work and how it could almost be a dance. And we think of so many maps as just two-dimensional, but if you can actually think of yourself kind of dancing between the two, and how would you dance differently moving from one part to another than the other ones. And I think it really helps like embrace that in-betweenness that those strings represent.
Yeah, and tension too. Like the other part of that is tension. So some can be very tense, tight, and then some can have a weight to them, So like that's another way of creating like flexibility within the language of the line. So I appreciate everyone like interest in and time to be able to share this with you. So thank you. I don't want to take over too much of the conversation.
How can our conversation make its way into the space, Tamron?
I mean, I can take my headphones off. Is that what you want? So that everyone
No. I meant like even in like, so if we're sitting here as visitors, right? Virtual visitors. What can we do? Like, I mean, is it, if maybe we want to make a post-it. I mean, I don't know. Does anyone feel like? I mean, it seems like that area of Robin's work about the body seems like a good space for us to hang
Yeah.
out, and then maybe there's something we want to.
So this, let's see. It's hard for, I don't really know enough about this. This is the CBAM model, and I don't necessarily know enough about it, I don't think. But let me see if I can find. So she's asking for words in a lot of these. Here's one. Let's see. Let's see if you can read it. I don't know. Can you read that?
Shall someone read it out just so we can? What memories, images, emotions, sensations, if any, come up for you as you reflect on your experience? I don't know if it's singular or plural. Experiences. Should we use the chat function?
Sure, yeah. And maybe just through, yeah, the experience of each of these different ways of thinking. This one's interesting too. And I have one other one too. Simultaneity was something that I could see visually, everything simultaneously was huge for me. That I couldn't, the linear nature of text was problematic in my sketchbooks especially.
You make me feel like taking down all my wall art and just creating like a big mess of ideas. I love it. Yeah.
I'm continuing this on my mini office corner when I get back to my apartment. So you'll see it.
Mika, it reminds me of last year when we drew on the windows and everything in the classroom, right? Like unexplored spaces for sure, like putting our ideas out there. I don't know.
And I have one other question if you want, and I can read it. In what ways do you uphold, disrupt, or otherwise respond to or engage in the culture of your department or field? Someone wrote, finding the fun, trying to keep things light on a Post-it.
Can I take this opportunity to share a post-it that I've got recently? I don't know if you can read this. It was I ordered a record from someone in the Ukraine, and it also came with these little badges, and it says, "Dear Customs, sending some free samples to my comrade. Thank you for your attention." So this was the artist had put this in to the package to be read by the customs officers. I just found it kind of a nice, it's by an artist. It's not, I don't know if it's an artwork, but I kind of appreciate this note to the customs office. So Tamrin, can you get any of our, are you willing to act as mediator for any of our comments to put on a post-it and add? Or are we breaking the spirit of the need to be there? You're muted if you're saying anything.
Sorry. I saved the chat and I will make those Post-its and add them to the space. This is a really amazing way to do this. We thought, you know, we were using Instagram to engage digitally, but this was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And maybe coming back to Daniel again, you know, like in our exercise of like trying to sculpt an idea together with our bodies and kind of like the unpredictability of where somebody is going to take it and our willingness to let them take it in that direction, right? So even if our original idea was not that, you know, that aspect of collaborative work that is not directed, right? Like that is emergent. I love that. I love that as part of that exercise, and I see it here in this exhibit also in the willingness to interact with the public. And the vulnerability of your colleague putting up like the criticisms, you know, even like we never know what's coming, right? But yeah.
Yeah, no, I keep on thinking of, I do not know the stick. How did you refer to it, Jonathan? Just by stick charts. Now, if you are familiar with the concept, with the image, like both visually and the idea of how do you represent, how do you chart not only territories but forces, no? Because the Polynesian, the sailors, they were not only interested in marking the territory but the tides, no? So part of their maps that are made weaving and at times stones, and so the thought processes, no? So we have words, we have icons, like that's, and these tools allow us to do something while limit us as well, no? And like when we see the traces, the lines, the chords that Daniel refers to, now that opens up like so many possibilities.
Could I add we've got about just 7 minutes left, and I don't know if this is a big topic, so I don't think it's something we can really tackle right now, but I just want to kind of put it in the air, as it were. I was thinking about the kind of question or the problem of Indigenous knowledges, artworks, without Indigenous presence in terms of Indigenous bodies and Indigenous peoples. And this is, you know, the mantra of, you know, they want our art but not us, and that question. And I think that this is a topic that can kind of bridge all our different fields and interests, I think. Anne, I don't want to, you know, put you on the spot or anything, but I was at the Billy Island kind of faculty steering committee meeting, and we were talking about the work with Indigenous comic makers, and I believe you've had some interest in the collection of Indigenous comics for the Billy Island collection, and I made the comment, so when will we get an Indigenous curate, like someone in the library system at OSU? And you know, and this whole question of, and I'm also, again, also part of this question comes with the permanence of presence as well, not just guest invited temporary um, uh, presence for kind of consultation, but actual, you know, permanent presence. And actually, you know, Tracy, your project, you know, coming from Miami, maybe, you know, that's a kind of attempt to create permanent presence of Indigenous faculty and these kind of things. So again, big topic, but I was just thinking about body and temporary space, but you know, and permanent presence in terms of Indigenous mediation of knowledge and these kinds of questions. So yeah, Anne or Tracy, if you want to, you know, say anything about those prompts.
Yeah, while this conversation is happening, I've been jotting down notes because this has been making my brain go in obvious ways. Because often I'm concerned with, I'm a museum coordinator at the Billie Ireland, so I'm really concerned with getting the exhibits up and the process and logistics of that. So I'm not always thinking of the whole, like the audience coming in while we're trying to like figure out how are we going to get this on the wall. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get that process in more, to think about like who is in the space and who is interacting with what we have up and where's the balance. And that is a very good, it's a good time to be thinking about these things as we're trying to bring more diversity in, is how do we connect more with people who have the knowledge, who are creating these things. And that's one reason why I started joining this group, because I'm fairly new to OSU and I'm trying to connect more with the community and figure out ways that I can work more with people on campus. So if anybody has any ideas or ways to suggest that we can connect better with people as we plan future exhibits and ways for people to interact with the collections, I'm very open to learning more about how to connect here in Columbus or like throughout the world too.
Richard, thanks for looping me in. I'm kind of an interloper since I haven't been participating in your discussions prior to today. So thank you for the invitation to join, and nice to see those of you I've met and hope to meet the rest of you at some point. I am a faculty member at the University of Miami, and I work in Indigenous studies in South America, mostly in Brazil and in the Andes. I've done some work in South Asia as well, and I'm trying to put together a project about transcontinental indigeneity that links the Americas with the global South more broadly in politics and social policy and environmentalism. And so the question of representation at my institution is really important, because despite the fact that University of Miami has an Indigenous name, we have no Indigenous presence on our campus whatsoever, including 0 Indigenous faculty. And so in this time of increased awareness about social justice, my university took it upon itself to sponsor projects that would address the gaps that we have at our institution. And this is clearly one of them. So together with some of my colleagues, we've been doing a bunch of different things to try to address this problem. And one of them is to make suggestions to the administration for the hiring of faculty and also recruitment and scholarship support for Indigenous and Native American students. So to your question, Richard, I think it's a really important one to constantly think about with the administrative hat on, because my fear and one of the obstacles that I think we face is the mindset of checking off a box and saying, okay, we hired 2 Indigenous people, that's taken care of now, everybody proceed as usual, right? And so in order to kind of push back against that, I think impetus from people who are trying to solve problems in a very practical way without necessarily knowing all of the issues that we address in our work that give rise to this absence.
Tracy, I think we've lost you, unless it's my computer. I can't.
No, I think we've lost Tracy. She kind of froze in the middle of that conversation.
Procedural issues.
Oh, Tracy, we lost you in the middle at that moment. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm talking to myself here. Did I don't know what you guys last heard. Anyway, I won't go on, but I just think it's very helpful to think about this in terms of establishing relationships that then continue, so that people from various disciplines and from different administrative positions can think about how Indigenous knowledge can contribute to fields of study that wouldn't necessarily go hand in hand with somebody who works just in Indigenous studies, so that people in the hard sciences and in medicine and in environmental policy and in the arts and so forth can think about establishing these relationships, and then having this kind of ongoing question of, well, what does Indigenous knowledge mean for the question that I'm asking, and how can that relationship that I've now established come to bear on the questions that I ask as a researcher or as a pedagogue, or as an administrator.
I think we lost you again, Tracy. I think you were saying administrator. Yeah, the last word we heard was administrator.
But I agree, like, and we had a discussion along these lines in Spanish and Portuguese, where we were kind of thinking about, like, what are the terms that we should be using. And one of the things that I kind of made reference to, maybe going along with Tracy's comment, is that yes, we can go for the pragmatic of, like, what words should we be using that are more inclusive, that recognize diversity, that type of thing. But ultimately, what we really want is to keep the discussion going, right? So to keep that dialogue going, that exchange, so along the lines of what Tracy is saying, and only by way of that dialogue to be able to really bridge, some of those positions or those differences. Yeah. And I think that things are changing always, like, these things are contextual, so we have to respond to them in context, in constant dynamic, but one of the things that we circulated also, Tracy, in our group, is just that the president of the university has mentioned, that here we have, like, an opportunity to do different types of hires, right? Lesser represented peoples, minority hires, and thinking about a smart strategic way of going about that is not just filling a quota, but is also, ensuring that knowledge and those ways of being, those ways of doing things, that different type of interaction comes into our dynamic.
That's great news.
I definitely hear also the thing of not just hiring Indigenous faculty, or actually any minority faculty, to do the work, to be then siloed into certain types of work to cover that area. But I think about this in the art world, like exhibitions by Indigenous curators about Black artists has been a very important kind of question and dynamic. We try to keep ourselves to the hour. We kind of pride ourselves on that here, so that that you're not going to be lingering on and it creeps into an hour and a half. So I really appreciate, every week, different people, different conversations, but similar kind of energy that we create in this space together. And so I just really appreciate your openness, willingness to share this hour with us all, and thank you. And we'll be here again next week.
Yeah, please join us next week, where we have the second workshop of Pachaysana, led by Pachaysana Institute, on storytelling for social change. So please join us next week for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi,
Hey
Michelle.
there. Hi.
I just wanted to tell you real quick that we'll be sending an email out on Monday, but I think what we'll probably do is ask everyone to, bring something that they might be able to use as an instrument. But aside of that, there won't be any.
Okay. Okay, I'll wait to send out the reminder for sure on that. Yeah. And I don't know if you were there, Daniel, for the last part of our conversation with Oscar and Ati and Anita Elvia. But Oscar brought up sort of like symbolically connecting things to kind of bring it all completely full circle with the concept of takionkoi, and referencing back to the pandemic. I don't know if you were there for that, but this idea of, like, the music and also the dance, and then connected with this idea of healing or sickness.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that would be, great, because then, if, mixing in the part of, body and territory and the healing of that relationship and the refinement of that relationship, I think it would, it'll play very nicely. Was there a decision to meet again to?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do, and before I forget, like, the other key part that kind of brings it all full circle is the reference to the ancestors, right? Like, so Takionkoi is like something about the land and the ancestors, you know. So I thought, wow, that's beautiful. I was so impressed at how incredible and emergent that whole conversation went. You know, we didn't have that idea going into it, so it was really great that it kind of just turned into its own thing. But yeah, so we did have a discussion about having another meeting prior. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type up the notes from our meeting and kind of try to some way lay out kind of like a general sequence that we can then play with and move things around. I think that the key thing, well, one of the things that's happening is that this is turning into a performance piece, right? Like where we have to coordinate our movements and transitions. So I think that one of the things to coordinate will be those transitions and reflections in between to sort of like help the audience, you know, make that leap with us to the next section, you know.
Yeah.
And then I also heard back from the conference organizers. I'd been waiting to hear back from them, and they're going to give us a 2-hour slot, like a special end of the day 2-hour slot on the 19th. So it's going to be on Friday the 19th. So hopefully that doesn't overlap with your. I thought that your commitment was on the 20th and 21st. So
Yes.
So that worked out great, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that should be fine.
Yeah. So yeah. Kind of a subdued group today, you know, a little bit less dynamic, but it happens, you know.
No, I thought it was a very good conversation. I was glad to be here. Once again, I just, Chelsea and I felt a little bad that we couldn't really be so present at that meeting yesterday. We didn't, I wanted to show up at least and be there present for a while, but it was.
That's okay. I think that with the notes and then with the additional meeting, everybody will be caught up. And it's weird. It's sort of like there's sort of like I mean, this is the beauty of working with artists, right? That somehow people organically like just intuitively connect, you know, like it's almost like you don't have to do the whole explanation and the kind of heavy lifting, pushing, you know. It's like somehow the ideas just sort of like flow into each other and it connects really beautifully. So I think that you guys will flow organically.
I agree.
So yeah. But anyway, yeah, no, thank you. And thank you again. Like I said, for me, that workshop last time was really, really powerful and got me thinking about like some of those themes, like, or the original theme that kind of we were under this umbrella was about mobility and immobility, right? And I always thought it was kind of a strange thought, like a strange concept. And where did they come up with that title, you know, and like that kind of thing? But more and more I like it, you know. That group has now disappeared, we have endured, you know, but still that concept of what does that mean, who has the right to be in certain spaces, how do we move through spaces, you know, what are the barriers that prevent us from like interacting with each other even on Zoom, you know, like that type of thing. But that powerful moment of like immobility, which I'd only thought about it conceptually, you know, it was intense, you know.
Yeah. Well, no, it was, thank you for sharing also your personal story that, it comes alive once again when your body remembers the feeling that you had at that moment, you know.
Yeah, it was weird. And it was sort of like the people had overheard us. I forgot to say a bunch of parts that would make sense to people on Zoom, but they had heard us speaking in Spanish, you know. Because it was one of Kai's classmates, they knew like I was a single mom, and so it was weird, like just standing there in the rain and these people like being completely insensitive or oblivious, and the moment of confusion of feeling like, is it because I'm Hispanic? Is it because I'm a single mom? Like, what is this? Like, is it just that they're so like just absorbed in themselves that they don't even think about any of this? But the confusion was really like the thing that I couldn't move. Like I didn't know what to do. And the only thing to do was to stand there in the rain and feel humiliated. You know, it was just such a weird experience, you know? But I thought about how people, you know, basically like experience that on a daily basis. You know, it was really honestly like I've experienced other things before, you know, But it was really honestly the very first time that I felt like I truly understood what racism is, like what effect it has, you know, in the mind and the body and the just your psychology thinking, is it something that I did, you know? Feeling like I'm a person of action, like what action do I take? You know, and
Yeah.
there's no action, you know?
Yeah, especially when, I mean, you want to take action, but also, you know, it's when is it the right time, when this is really the protagonist of the day is my child, and do I interrupt, you know, do I take away their agency because this is my
Right. Yeah. No, it definitely provided an opening. I mean, Kai was really little. I think he was like in first grade at that time. It provided an opening for talking about privilege, you know, which is something here, and he does not look Hispanic at all. He looks like a total blanquito, you know.
Right.
But thinking about those things, thinking about, you know, how discrimination manifests itself. So it was a productive opening for thinking about those things, you know. I think that there's also this real kind of moment where just like realizing how oblivious people who are in positions of privilege are, and that ultimately that is our target audience, right? Like that those are the people that we need to educate, and yet the barrier, it was just so high, like where they just did not get any of it, you know.
Yeah.
So
How does Kai now?
I think we're still recording. Shit. I'm gonna have to trash this entire recording now.
You can trim the end. There's a
I can.
did you record it to the cloud?
Yeah.
The first, I think it's like